Hello, my name is Alex Harris, and today I'm going to talk to you about the history of oil production and refinery in the U.S. from its origins in 1859 through the end of the Second World War. In 1859, two separate events would jumpstart the petroleum and the auto industries, and the timing was pure coincidence. In that year, Colonel Edwin L. Drake drilled the world's first working oil well in Titusville, Pennsylvania, and French engineer J.J. Etienne Lenoir made the world's first dependable internal combustion engine, which was powered by gasoline. Colonel Drake's oil well kicked off the petroleum industry, and Lenoir's work paved the way for the creation of the modern automobile. But 40 years would pass before the interdependency of the oil and auto industries would become clear. That early period, from 1860 to 1900, was marked by many technological innovations as auto inventors sought to tap the potential of the internal combustion engine, and petroleum pioneers got better at producing, refining, and delivering oil and oil products. Oil industry entrepreneurs such as John D. Rockefeller and Henry Flagler discovered new oil fields, drilled deeper oil wells than Colonel Drake's first 70-foot well, and made great strides in both refining and distributing refined products. The first oil refinery, which used atmospheric distillation to produce kerosene, was constructed in 1862. Gasoline was a byproduct of these early distillation units, and in a few decades would emerge as their most important product. But first, the oil industry would have to languish through the boom and bust cycle of the latter part of the 19th century. The largest and most important company and individual of this era was John D. Rockefeller, who began his career in refining, became the industry's first baron in 1865 when he formed the Standard Oil Company. By 1879, Standard Oil controlled not only 90% of America's refining capacity, but also its pipelines and gathering systems. By the end of the 19th century, Standard Oil's dominance had grown to include exploration, production, and marketing. Standard Oil reportedly employed over 60,000 people in 1909 prior to the company's government-ordered breakdown into 34 smaller companies due to the Standard Oil Company's unreasonable monopoly of the oil industry. In the United States, the 1901 discovery of the Spindletop field in Texas eventually spawned companies such as Gulf Oil, Texaco, and others. The dominance of the United States during this era was illustrated by the fact that, regardless of where oil was produced in the world, its price was fixed at that of the Gulf of Mexico. Beginning with World War I, oil became a strategic energy source and tremendous geopolitical prize. In the 1930s, Gulf Oil, BP, Texaco, and Chevron were involved in concessions that made major discoveries in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Libya. Based on these discoveries, a cartel of 7 companies was formed that controlled the world's oil and gas business for much of the 20th century. Known as the Seven Sisters, they include Exxon, which was originally Standard Oil, Royal Dutch, which is Shell, BP, Mobil, Texaco, Gulf, and Chevron. Even though the first oil well was drilled in 1859 in Pennsylvania, it wasn't until the beginning of the 20th century that oil production started booming along with the Industrial Revolution. Shown here are the states that were regularly producing by 1900. As you can see, just 45 years later, the number of U.S. states and territories involved in oil production jumped up to a total of 31. This graph shows the juxtaposition of the national GDP in millions of dollars compared to the cost of crude oil per barrel over the same time period. We can see that the cost of crude oil wasn't always an indicator of a healthy economy, and the global market and the increasingly diverse uses for oil drove the production value. Shown here, the production of crude oil increased from less than 10,000 barrels a day in 1900 to over 4.5 million barrels in 1945. Again, production was directly tied to increased utilization throughout the U.S. and the world. As of 1945, over 90% of all U.S. energy consumption was composed of fossil fuels, 32% of that being specifically petroleum-based. Despite the boom and bust culture of oil production in its early years, the U.S. had established its global oil presence by World War II. World War II made the oil industry a key American resource. Oil company research and executive leadership played major roles in the conflict. Research increased the number of products made from petroleum and natural gas, including the explosive TNT and artificial rubber. The Jersey DuPont jointly owned product tetraethyl lead upgraded gasoline to improve airplane speed. Oil tankers supplied gasoline for the Allies at a great risk from submarine attacks. The government rationed gasoline and controlled prices during the war. In the last analysis, the war ended the delusion that American supplies of crude were unlimited, so that the industry and the securing of oil became a top priority for both foreign and domestic policy. When the war ended, the United States faced the problem of stabilizing the peace. Over the next 45 years, numerous major crises occurred, in many of which oil played a key role. Suffice it to say, oil should be considered the keystone of the standard of living in the United States and to a large degree its rank as a world power.